He slammed her phone against the marble floor so hard the screen shattered into a dozen pieces, and then he grabbed her by the wrists and twisted until she cried out. Julian Mercer didn't raise his voice. He never needed to. He just leaned in close enough that Claire could smell the whiskey on his breath, and he said very quietly, "You don't get to leave me. Not tonight, not ever." That was the moment Claire Harper understood with absolute and terrifying clarity that the man she had once loved was going to hurt her badly tonight and no one was coming to save her. Before we go any further, if this story already has your heart pounding, please subscribe to our channel right now, hit that notification bell, and drop a comment telling us what city you're watching from. We want to know how far this story has traveled. Now let's get into it. Claire had worked a 12-hour shift at Mercy General that day. She had held the hand of a 63-year-old man while he took his last breath, had stayed 2 hours past her scheduled end time to finish charting because the overnight nurse called in sick and she had eaten exactly half a granola bar for lunch while standing over a medication cart. She was tired in the way that went past her bones and settled somewhere deeper in the place where a person stores everything they cannot afford to feel while they are still on duty. She had come to Julian's penthouse because he had called her 14 times. 14. She had counted them on the train ride over, watching the number climb on her screen, and she had told herself she was only going to pick up her things. The box of her belongings she had left behind when she moved out 3 months ago, a few books, a spare pair of nursing clogs, the small framed photograph of her mother that she should never have brought to his place to begin with. She was only going to get the box and leave. That was all. She should have known better. She had known better. She had just come anyway. "You have been ignoring me," Julian said, releasing her wrist and taking a step back, which was somehow worse than when he was holding on. He moved to the bar cart and poured himself another 2 fingers of whiskey, and he did it slowly like a man who had all the time in the world. 3 months, Claire. 3 months of silence. Do you know what that does to a person? Julian. She kept her voice level. She had learned to do that around him, to flatten everything out, to give him nothing to grab onto. "We broke up. That means I don't have to answer your calls." "We broke up," he repeated, and he almost laughed. Almost. "That's what you think happened. You think you ended something." He turned around with his glass. "You didn't end anything. You just took a break from understanding what's good for you." She moved toward the side table where her box was sitting. "I'm going to take my things and I'm going to go home." "You are not going anywhere." He said it the way he said everything, with complete certainty, like reality was something he had already arranged to his liking, and she just hadn't been informed yet. That was Julian's particular gift. He had a way of saying things that made the world feel like it had already agreed with him, like her resistance was not defiance but simply confusion that he would eventually correct. She picked up the box anyway. He crossed the room in 4 steps and took it out of her hands. Not roughly. That was the part that always unsteadied her, the control in it. He set the box back on the table and stood between her and the door, and he looked at her with those gray eyes that had once made her feel chosen and now only made her feel cold. "I invited some people tonight," he said. "You're going to stay. You're going to smile. And tomorrow we are going to have a conversation about you coming back." "Well, I'm not coming back." "Claire." "I am not coming back, Julian. There is nothing to talk about. I want my box and I want to leave. And if you don't step aside, I am going to call the police." She watched something move across his face, a flicker of something that wasn't quite anger yet, but was the thing that came right before it. She had learned to read that flicker, the way she had learned to read a patient's vitals. It was a warning. It meant the situation was about to deteriorate. "Go ahead," and he said. "Call them. Tell them that your ex-boyfriend asked you to stay for a drink. That's not a crime, Claire. That's a Wednesday." She reached for her phone. That was when he moved faster than she expected and knocked it out of her hand before she could dial. And then he picked it up off the floor and looked at her with an expression that was almost sorry, almost regretful, and he dropped it against the marble from chest height. The screen exploded. And he grabbed her wrist, and he said what he said. "You don't get to leave me. Not tonight. Not ever." She did not scream. She was a nurse. She had been trained to function under pressure, to prioritize, to assess, to move. She pulled her wrist back and put 3 feet of distance between them, and she looked at the door and she calculated. The door was 12 feet away. Julian was between her and the door. He weighed at least 60 pounds more than she did, and he had already demonstrated tonight that he was past the point of pretending to be reasonable. Her phone was in pieces on the floor. Her coat was on the hook by the entrance, which meant her keys were in her coat, which meant even if she got past him, she would need an extra 2 seconds at the door. 2 seconds was a long time. She looked at the window. 23rd floor, not a practical option. She looked at the landline phone on the desk in the corner. He caught her looking at it. "Don't," he said. The doorbell rang. They both froze. Claire turned toward the door without thinking, and Julian's jaw tightened, and for one suspended moment, neither of them moved. Then the bell rang again, 2 short rings, deliberate, unhurried, and Julian said something under his breath that she didn't catch, and he went to the intercom panel by the door. "I said no visitors tonight," he said into it. The voice that came back through the speaker was low and unhurried, the kind of voice that had never needed to raise itself to be heard. "That's interesting, Julian. Open the door." Julian's entire posture changed. It was subtle, but Claire had spent 3 years learning to read him, and she caught a slight stiffening across the shoulders, a fractional pulling back of the chin, something that, on anyone else, she would have called fear. On Julian, it looked like a man recalibrating. He buzzed the door open. He did not look at Claire. He straightened his jacket. He turned toward the entrance of the penthouse and he waited. And Claire stood very still in the middle of the room, her broken phone on the floor beside her, her wrists still aching, and she waited too. The man who walked in was not what she expected. She wasn't sure what she expected. Julian's world was full of men who wore their money and their power like armor, loud and obvious. But this man wore neither loudly. He was tall, dark-haired, somewhere in his late 30s, with the kind of stillness that didn't come from calm, but from absolute control. He wore a charcoal suit with no tie, the collar open, and he moved through the door the way water moves downhill, without effort, without hesitation, like he had simply decided to be here, and the world had rearranged itself to accommodate the decision. He looked at Julian first, then he looked at Claire. His eyes were very dark, and they took in the broken phone on the floor, and her wrist, which she was still holding against her side in the distance between her and Julian, and he understood all of it in the space of about 2 seconds. She could see him understand it. That was the thing that surprised her most, that he didn't look away. "Dominic," Julian said, and there was something in the way he said the name that she had never heard from him before, a texture she couldn't name. "I wasn't expecting you." "Clearly," said Dominic DeLuca. She knew the name. She had heard Julian say it before in phone calls she was not meant to overhear, in conversations that stopped when she walked into a room. She knew that Dominic DeLuca was someone Julian was careful around, someone he spoke of with a reverence that sat uneasily next to Julian's relentless need to be the most important person in every room. She had never seen the two of them together. She understood now, in a way she hadn't before, why Julian had always kept them separate. "This is a private evening," Julian said. "Whatever business you have, it can wait until—" "It can't," Dominic said. He hadn't moved from where he stopped near the entry. He looked at Claire again. "Are you all right?" The question landed strangely. It was so direct. No preamble, no social performance around it. Just the question aimed at her with the expectation that she would answer honestly. "I'm fine," she said, because that was what she always said. He looked at her wrist. "You don't look fine." Julian stepped forward. "She's my girlfriend. Whatever you think she is not your girlfriend." Dominic didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The temperature in the room changed anyway. "She was your girlfriend, past tense, and you broke her phone and you put your hands on her, and that means this is no longer a private evening. That means this is my business." "You have no standing here," Julian said. His voice had a new quality now, a thinness like something stretched too tight. "Whatever relationship we have professionally does not give you the right to walk into my home and—" "Julian." Dominic let the name sit there for a moment. "Look at me." Julian stopped talking. "I'm going to give you one opportunity to end this gracefully. She is going to take her things. She is going to leave. And you are going to let her go, and in the morning you are going to move on with your life, and nothing about tonight is going to become a problem. Do you understand what I'm telling you?" The silence stretched. Claire was aware that she was holding her breath. She was also aware somewhere underneath it, the fear and the exhaustion and the adrenaline of something else, a very strange, very inconvenient sense of relief. like a knot that had been pulled tight for 3 years had just been loosened by exactly one turn. She doesn't want to go with you, Julian said. His voice had dropped. He was working hard to sound dangerous, and the effort of it showed. She came here because she wants to come back. She just needs time to ask her, Dominic said. Julian stopped. Ask her, he said again. Right now, ask her what she wants. The moment that followed was one of the strangest of Claire's life. She had navigated emergencies. She had made split-second decisions in trauma bays. She had once talked a patient down from a ledge while maintaining enough professional calm that her hands hadn't shaken until 20 minutes later, alone in the break room. She knew how to perform steadiness. But this was different, because Julian was looking at her and Dominic was looking at her, and the question was not complicated. She knew what she wanted. She had always known what she wanted. The problem had never been knowing, and yet the weight of saying it out loud in this room with Julian's eyes on her still cost her something. She picked up her box. I want to go, she said. Julian's face did something she had never seen it do before. It cracked. Not all the way, he was too controlled for that, but at the edges around the eyes, in the corners of his mouth. She had spent 3 years watching him be certain about everything, and she watched him be uncertain now, and it was terrible and sorry and not enough to make her stay. Claire, get her coat, Dominic said to no one in particular, and then he moved toward her, and he took the box out of her hands with a matter-of-factness that didn't ask permission, and he said quietly, just for her, I have you. She looked up at him. He was much closer now. His voice had been different at that distance, lower, less performance, more real. She didn't know this man. She knew his name and his reputation, and the way Julian's voice changed when he mentioned him, and she did not know what came next, or what his offer was going to cost her, or whether trading one dangerous situation for another was wisdom, or just a different flavor of desperate. But she picked up her coat off the hook, and she walked out the door. The elevator down from the 23rd floor was all mirrors, and she stood in it with Dominic DeLuca and her small box and her shattered phone, and she looked at her own reflection and thought, you got out. Whatever happens next, you got out tonight. He'll come after you, Dominic said. He was looking straight ahead at the doors. I know. He's not going to let this go easily. Men like Julian don't. He paused. You know what kind of man I am. It wasn't a question, but she answered it anyway. I've heard things. Then you know that what I'm about to offer you comes with its own complications. The elevator stopped. The doors opened onto the lobby, all marble and low light, a doorman at the far end who looked up and then looked very carefully away. Dominic turned to look at her, straight on for the first time since they had been in that penthouse. Up close, there was something she hadn't expected in his face. Not softness exactly, but specificity, like he was actually looking at her, not at the situation. I have a problem, he said, a business problem that requires a solution that is somewhat unconventional, and that solution involves a woman who is willing to occupy a certain role in my life publicly for a limited period of time. It's not permanent. It's not dangerous, not in the way you're thinking. And I would have the resources to ensure that Julian Mercer never bothered you again. She stared at him. You're serious. I'm always serious. You want me to what? Pretend to be your girlfriend, your wife? My companion, he said. It's less complicated than it sounds. It sounds extremely complicated. Something that might have been amusement moved across his face. It wasn't a smile exactly. It was more like the acknowledgement that a smile was possible. You're a nurse. You're practical. Think of it practically. You have a problem, Julian. I have a problem. A situation in my business that requires a specific kind of social presence. We can solve each other's problems for a defined period of time, after which you walk away with your freedom fully intact and your ex fully neutralized. And what exactly do I have to do? Attend certain events, be present at certain dinners, be convincing. He paused. That's all. She looked at him for a long moment. The marble lobby around them was very quiet. Somewhere outside the city was doing what the city always did. Noise motion people moving through their lives, and in here it was just the two of them. And a question that she had about 45 seconds to answer because she could feel herself standing at the kind of crossroads that didn't wait. You could have left me up there, she said. Why didn't you? He considered the question seriously, which she hadn't expected. Because I could see what was happening and I had the ability to stop it. He said it simply, not like a hero explaining his heroism, like someone stating a straightforward fact about cause and effect. That's usually a reason enough. She thought about Julian's face when she said she wanted to go. She thought about 12-hour shifts and shattered phone screens and the photograph of her mother still sitting in that box in her arms. She thought about the fact that she had no real plan. She had a studio apartment, a savings account, and an ex-boyfriend who had just proven conclusively that he was not going to honor the ending of their relationship. She thought about Dominic DeLuca's voice saying, "I have you," in a room where no one had said anything like that to her in longer than she could remember. "I want it in writing," as she said. "Whatever we agree to, terms, duration, what's expected of me and what isn't." He looked at her, that not quite smile again. "You're negotiating with me. You said to think practically." This time it was an actual smile, slight controlled but real. "I did say that." "Then yes, I'm negotiating. I want a written agreement. I want to maintain my job at the hospital because I am not giving up my career for anyone. I want my own space. Wherever you have me staying, and I want your actual word, not just a contract, your word, that when this is over, it is over, and you walk away clean." She had spent 3 years letting Julian tell her what was reasonable to ask for. She was done with that. Dominic looked at her for a moment longer, then he said, "Agreed." Just like that. "You're not asking for anything unreasonable. I don't make a habit of going back on my word," and he tilted his head slightly. "The fact that you're standing here negotiating instead of falling apart after what just happened upstairs tells me you're probably exactly the kind of woman who can do this without getting confused about what it is." She wasn't sure how to take that. She decided to take it as a compliment and see what happened. "I need a new phone," she said. "Obviously. Tonight. My car's outside." She adjusted her grip on the box and looked at him. This man she didn't know, with his dark eyes and his controlled stillness and his reputation that preceded him. Like weather, and she made the choice that she already knew she was going to make, because the truth was, she had made it in the elevator when he said, "I have you," and something in her exhausted, wrung-out 3 years too long body had believed him. She walked toward the door. Behind her, she heard him follow. Outside, the night air hit her face, and she breathed it in, cold, city-clean, the particular sharpness of spring, in a place built from concrete and glass, and she stood on the sidewalk for exactly 1 second with her eyes closed. Then she opened them. The car was black, long, and waiting. The driver had the door open before she reached it. Dominic came up beside her, and she could feel, not physically, but in the way that you feel the weather shifting before the rain actually comes, the weight of whatever she had just stepped into. "One question," she said before she got in. He waited. "Did you come to Julian's tonight because of me, or was it actually business?" He was quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet that wasn't avoiding the answer but was actually deciding how much of the true one to give. "It started as business," he said finally. She waited. "And then I saw you through the glass of the elevator lobby when I arrived," he said, "and I changed my mind about what kind of evening this was going to be." He wasn't looking away when he said it. That was what she noticed. He said it the same way he said everything else, directly, without decoration, like a man who had decided somewhere along the way that honesty was simply more efficient than its alternatives. She got in the car. He got in after her. The door closed. The city moved around them, and Claire Harper, who had come to Julian's penthouse to collect a box of things she'd left behind, found herself instead at the beginning of something she didn't have a name for yet, something that felt against all logic, against every sensible warning her rational mind was trying to send, like the first full breath she had taken in years. The new phone was waiting for her when she woke up the next morning. It was sitting on the nightstand in a room she didn't recognize. Cream walls, heavy curtains, a bed so well made it felt like sleeping inside a cloud. And for exactly 3 seconds, she forgot everything. Then she remembered. And she lay there staring at the ceiling and did a very deliberate mental inventory, the same one she did after overnight shifts, when reality felt a little blurred at the edges, her name, the date where she was, and why. Claire Harper. Her name was Claire Harper. She was 26 years old. She was a nurse at Mercy General. She had spent last night in a black car with Dominic DeLuca, and when they had arrived at this house, not an apartment, a house set back from the street behind iron gates, in a neighborhood where the trees were old and the silence was deliberate, He had shown her to this room himself, handed her a new phone still in its box, and said, "Get some sleep. We'll talk in the morning." And then he had walked down the hall and closed his own door, and that had been that. She sat up. The phone was a model newer than anything she had ever owned. She set it up mechanically, transferred her contacts from the cloud backup, and sat on the edge of the bed with it in her hands and thought about calling someone. Her friend Dana, maybe. Or her colleague Priya, who had been trying for months to convince her that leaving Julian was not only possible but necessary. She thought about what she would say. She tried a few versions of it in her head, and all of them sounded insane, so she put the phone down and went to find coffee instead. The kitchen was at the end of a long hallway, and Dominic was already in it. He was at the counter with a cup in one hand and a document in the other, still in what she assumed were yesterday's clothes shirt, untucked, now jacket gone, sleeves rolled to the elbow, and he looked up when she came in with the expression of someone who had been awake for some time. "Coffee," he said, nodding toward the machine. Not a question, an identification of available resources. "Please," she said. She poured her own cup. She was not going to be the kind of woman who stood there waiting for a man to pour her coffee. Not in his house, not anywhere. She had done enough waiting. She sat down across from him at the kitchen island, and they drank their coffee in silence for a moment, and it was unexpectedly, bizarrely not uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that had some room in it. "I had the agreement drafted this morning," he said, sliding the document across to her. "Read all of it." She read all of it. It took 10 minutes. He didn't rush her. She flagged 2 clauses she wanted modified, one around her hospital schedule and one around public appearances conflicting with her shifts. And he read her notes and said, "Fine," and wrote the adjustments by hand in the margins, which was not how she expected a Mafia boss to handle contract negotiations. But then again, she had not previously negotiated with a Mafia boss, so her frame of reference was limited. 3 months, she said when she had finished reading the final version. 3 months, he confirmed. "And Julian is already aware that you are no longer available to him." He said it without looking up from his cup. Flat, factual. She set down the document. "What does that mean exactly?" He looked at her then. "It means I made a phone call this morning. Julian Mercer understands his situation." "His situation," she repeated. "He has certain financial arrangements that run through people who are connected to me. He has been reminded of that." A pause. "He won't contact you, and if he does, you tell me." She didn't know whether to feel relieved or unsettled. She felt both simultaneously, which was becoming something of a theme in her interactions with this man. "You didn't hurt him." It wasn't quite a question. He answered it anyway. "Not this morning." She absorbed that. "I don't want anyone hurt on my account." Noted and irrelevant. "What I do in my business is not something you need to manage." He said it without heat, just as information, a boundary clearly drawn. "What happens between you and me inside the terms of that agreement is a different matter. That part I take your input on seriously." "How democratic of you," she said. That almost smile again. She was starting to catalog its variations. This one was the one that meant she had said something he hadn't expected, and he was deciding whether to be amused or impressed by it. "You start tonight," he said. She put down her cup. "Tonight? There's a dinner. Business associates. It matters that you're there." He watched her. "I can have someone bring you appropriate clothing. Or I can have a car take you to wherever you'd like to shop. Your preference. I have perfectly adequate clothing. I don't doubt that. This particular dinner requires a specific register." "What register?" He considered. "The kind that says you chose to be there, that you want to be there, that being with me is not an obligation." "And you think I can pull that off?" "You talked down a suicidal patient from a building ledge in 2022, he said. She went very still. "Relax," he said. "I do due diligence on people I bring into my life. It's not personal." He paused. "Or rather it is. That's the point. I checked because it mattered." He took a sip of his coffee. "You have handled more difficult performances than pretending to instruct a dinner party. I think you can manage." She stared at him for a moment. "You looked into me." "Yes. Before last night." He didn't answer immediately, and the pause itself was an answer. "You knew who I was," she said slowly. "When you came to Julian's last night, you already knew. I knew Julian had a former girlfriend who worked at Mercy General. I knew her name. He set down his cup. I didn't know it would matter until I saw you in that lobby and understood what was happening upstairs. The kitchen was very quiet. She could hear her own breathing. Why does it matter? She asked. Why does any of this, me specifically, why does it matter to you? He looked at her for a long moment, not the quick, assessing look she had gotten in Julian's penthouse. Something slower, something that she had the strange feeling he did not do often. There are people, he said finally, who survive their circumstances by becoming hard. And there are people who survive by becoming very, very soft at appearing soft while being harder inside than anyone around them realizes. He picked up his cup again. You are the second kind. That's useful to me. And it's also not nothing. She didn't know what to say to that, so she didn't say anything. She looked at the document on the counter between them. She thought about the dinner tonight, about the role she had agreed to play, about the fact that she had agreed to it in an elevator lobby at midnight, because a man she didn't know said, I have you, and she had believed him. I'll need to call the hospital, she said. I'm on shift tomorrow at 6. I know your schedule. My driver will have you there. You know my schedule. Due diligence, he said again with the tone of someone who found her surprise mildly puzzling. She picked up her new phone. She had 73 text messages, Julian, a dozen from Julian. Multiple numbers she didn't recognize that were probably Julian with new numbers, and one from Priya that said simply, Are you alive? Call me. She texted Priya back. Alive. Long story. Tell you at work. Then she put the phone face down. One more thing, she said. He waited. Last night when you said I have you. She made herself look straight at him. What did you mean by that? He was quiet for a moment. She had the feeling he was deciding again how much of the true answer to give her. Exactly what it sounded like, he said. Then he stood up, picked up his document, and walked out of the kitchen. She sat there alone for a minute with her coffee going cold and her pulse doing something she was going to blame entirely on the stress of the previous 12 hours. And she thought, this is the most complicated thing you have ever walked into. And she thought you walked into it anyway. She was going to have to think very carefully about what that said about her. The driver, whose name was Marco, took her to a boutique near the financial district where a woman named Sylvie had apparently been called ahead and was waiting. Sylvie did not ask her opinion. She took one look at Claire, circled her twice, and began pulling things. Claire stood in the fitting room and let it happen because she had learned years ago to allocate her energy carefully, and arguing with a woman who clearly knew her craft was a waste of it. What she ended up in was a dress the color of deep burgundy, simple enough to not look like she was trying elegant enough to say that she knew exactly where she was. Sylvie looked at her in it and made a sound of professional satisfaction. Claire looked at herself in the mirror and thought Julian would have told me I looked better in blue. And then she thought Julian is not here. She squared her shoulders. She looked at herself the way she looked at a patient chart, assessing clear-eyed, deciding what she was working with. She looked like someone who had chosen to be exactly where she was. Good enough. Marco dropped her back at the house with 2 hours before the dinner, and she spent them the way she spent any pre-shift preparation, methodically, efficiently, with absolutely no time spent in front of the mirror catastrophizing. She had done harder things than dinner parties. She had done considerably harder things than dinner parties while also monitoring 4 patients' vitals and charting simultaneously. Dominic was waiting at the base of the stairs when she came down already in a dark suit that looked like it had been made for him specifically, which it probably had. He looked up when he heard her on the stairs, and something moved through his expression, briefly, quickly controlled almost before it started, that she filed away without commenting on. You'll do, he said. High praise, she said. He almost smiled. Ready. No, she said honestly. Let's go anyway. The dinner was at a private club in a building so old the walls seemed to breathe history. There were 8 people at the table, and Claire had been in enough high-pressure rooms to know how to read them inside 60 seconds. 3 men who did business with Dominic and were measuring her to understand what her presence meant. 2 wives who were doing the same thing but more efficiently. 1 associate she pegged immediately as someone who reported back to someone else because he looked at his phone too often and at her too carefully. And 1 man at the far end of the table, older, thick-necked, silver-haired, who had the particular quality of someone accustomed to everyone else in the room, orienting themselves around him. His name was Enzo Vitali, and Dominic introduced him last, which told her everything about the table's power structure. So, Enzo said, looking at Claire with the kind of appraisal that was not remotely subtle, Dominic finally brings someone to the table we had started to think he was married to his work. He might still be, Claire said. I'm learning to share. There was a beat of silence. Then Enzo laughed genuinely, a big laugh that reset the room's temperature entirely, and Dominic beside her was very still in the way that she was beginning to recognize as the version of him that was pleased. I like her, Enzo announced to the table. Where did you find this one? She found me, Dominic said. He said it without looking at her, but his hand under the table found hers briefly, a slight pressure, a signal, and she understood good. Keep going. She kept going. She talked to Enzo's wife about the hospital, framed carefully enough to be interesting without revealing anything clinical. She talked to one of the business associates about a charity gala he mentioned, asking enough specific questions that he leaned in and talked longer than he intended to. She watched the man who reported back and gave him nothing useful, all warmth, no information, the way she handled drug-seeking patients who were very pleasant about it. She ate her dinner. She drank exactly 1.5 glasses of wine. She laughed when it was appropriate and was quiet when quiet was more powerful. She was good at this. She hadn't known she was going to be this good at this. By the time dessert arrived, she could feel the table's opinion of her solidifying into something favorable, and she was aware with the same part of her brain that tracked patient deterioration and medication timing that this was going to matter. Whatever Dominic needed from this evening, she had helped secure it. She could feel it, the way she could feel a room shift in an emergency when the chaos started moving toward order. What she did not anticipate was the moment 40 minutes into dessert when her new phone buzzed with a number she didn't recognize, and the text read, "You think he's protecting you. Ask him why he really needs you there. Ask him about Elena." She kept her face perfectly still. She put the phone face down. She picked up her wine glass and took a sip and continued the conversation. She was in something about a hospital fundraiser, and she did not look at Dominic. But her mind was already moving. Elena. She didn't know that name. She hadn't seen it in the contract. Dominic had told her the arrangement was about a business situation that required a social presence, and she had accepted that because it was the explanation that made sense at the time. But someone at this table, or connected to someone at this table, was watching her closely enough to text her from an unknown number during the dinner itself, and the message was designed to make her doubt, which meant she was either being tested or warned, and she didn't know yet which one it was. She set down her glass. She smiled at something Enzo's wife said. She did not let a single thing she was thinking show on her face. This was what 3 years with Julian had given her, that she hadn't known was an asset. Until now, she was very, very good at performing composure, while her insides ran a completely different calculation. Dominic drove back with her in the car. Not Marco this time. Dominic drove himself, which she hadn't expected. The city moved past the windows, and she watched it and waited until they were through the gates before she said anything. "Who is Elena?" The car stopped. He had pulled into the drive and put it in park, and the engine was still running, and the silence that followed her question was not a comfortable one. It was the kind of silence that had shape to it. "Where did you hear that name?" he asked. His voice was exactly the same as always. That was what told her it wasn't. She showed him the text. He looked at it for a long moment. Then he handed the phone back. His jaw was very tight. "Someone at the table was watching you more carefully than they should have been." "That's not an answer." "No," he said. "It's not." She turned to look at him directly. "The deal was honesty, Dominic. You said you take my input seriously. So I'm telling you right now, if there is something about why I'm specifically here that you haven't told me, I need to know it. Not eventually. Now." He looked out through the windshield. He was quiet for long enough that she was about to say something else, and then he said, "Elena was my fiancée." She waited. "She left 8 months ago. She didn't leave the way people leave. She was taken." He paused. "She got out. She's safe. But the people who took her were making a statement, and the statement was that anyone in my life is a target." He turned to look at her. "What I need right now is for certain people to believe there is someone in my life again, someone I would protect. It changes the calculation for my enemies. It signals stability, strength." He held her gaze. "And if it also means that while you are visibly associated with me, Julian Mercer does not come within 100 yards of you. I didn't think those two things were in conflict. They're not, she said. But you should have told me. Yes, he said, I should have. She looked at him. He didn't look away. That was the thing about Dominic DeLuca, that she kept coming back to the thing that kept unsettling her in ways that had nothing to do with fear. He never looked away. Most men, when they were caught in something, a half-truth, an omission, a moment of being less than they wanted to appear, looked away. He didn't. He just looked back at her and let her see whatever was true. Is she safe? Claire asked. Elena, something moved through his expression. Something real. Something that cost him to let her see. Yes, she's in a different country. She's not coming back. A pause. That was her choice. I understood it. But you still, it doesn't matter what I still, he said. And the way he said it was so definitive, so firmly aimed at closing that door, that she let it stay closed. For now. The person who sent that text, she said, is someone who wanted me scared, or someone who wanted to see how you'd react when I brought it up. He looked at her with something that was close to respect. Yes. Which one? I'm not sure yet, but I will be by morning. She nodded. She opened the car door and then stopped. She looked back at him. This man with his dark eyes and his carefully controlled expressions, and his fiancée who had left, and his enemies who sent anonymous texts to women at dinner parties. And she thought about what he had said in the kitchen that morning, that she was the kind of person who was harder inside than anyone around her realized. For what it's worth, she said, I'm not scared. He looked at her. I thought, you should know that, she said. Whatever that person was hoping to accomplish tonight, it didn't work. She got out of the car. She walked to the front door. Behind her, she heard him turn off the engine. She did not look back because she had the feeling that if she did, the expression on his face was one she was not quite ready to see. She found out who sent the text on a Thursday. She had been at Mercy General for a double shift, 14 hours, 2 codes, 1 patient, who pulled his IV out 3 times and apologized sincerely each time. And she came back to Dominic's house at nearly midnight to find him in the study with a man she had never seen before, and the door opened just wide enough that she could hear the tail end of what was being said. It was Caruso's man, the stranger said, the one sitting across from Vitali. He was running her number before the appetizers were cleared. And Caruso knows about Elena, Dominic said. It wasn't a question. Caruso knows everything eventually. That's his thing. He collects. Then he knows what this is. A pause. He knows what it looks like. Whether he believes it is a different problem. She didn't stop to hear more. She went to the kitchen, poured herself a glass of water, and stood at the counter and thought about the name Caruso, the way she thought about a new diagnosis, turning it over, looking for the edges, figuring out what it connected to. She didn't know the name yet. She was going to. Dominic appeared in the kitchen doorway 5 minutes later. He looked at her and knew immediately that she had heard something. How much, he asked. Enough, she said. Who is Caruso? He came into the kitchen. He got himself a glass of water and drank half of it, standing at the counter, and she could see him deciding again how much, what order, which parts mattered tonight versus which parts could wait. And she had started to recognize that decision process in him, the way she recognized the decision process in a senior doctor, weighing how much to tell a patient who had just received difficult news. Caruso is the reason Elena left, he said. He was making a play for territory mine, and he used her to send a message. He didn't hurt her. He just made it very clear that he could. He paused. She made the decision to go. I didn't fight it. She was right that leaving was safer. And now he thinks you bringing me around is a counter move. Because it is. He looked at her. I told you that. You told me part of it, the part where I make you look stable. She set down her glass. You didn't tell me Caruso was specifically the target. That changes the picture. Does it change your answer? She thought about it honestly. It was one of the things she had decided about this arrangement. She was going to be honest with herself about it, all of it, rather than building a comfortable story around the parts she didn't want to look at directly. No, she said finally, but it means I need to understand what I'm actually walking into. If Caruso is watching me, I need to know what he's looking for. Dominic set down his glass. He looked at her with the particular quality of attention she had noticed from the very beginning, like she was a variable he kept adjusting his calculations around. He's looking for a vulnerability, Someone he can use the same way he used Elena. He'll look for anything that suggests you matter to me beyond the arrangement. Does anything suggest that? She asked. The question sat there between them for a moment. She had asked it practically clinically, the way she'd ask about a patient's symptom, not because she didn't know it meant something, but because she was not yet willing to deal with what it might mean. You should get some sleep, Dominic said. You look like you ran a marathon. Double shift, she said, and you didn't answer my question. No, he said, I didn't. He picked up his glass and walked out. She stood in the kitchen alone and thought, you are in trouble. Not the kind of trouble she had walked out of Julian's penthouse to escape, a completely different kind. The kind that didn't have a clear exit and wasn't sure it wanted one. She went to bed. She did not sleep easily. The next 11 days had a rhythm to them that she hadn't anticipated and couldn't quite account for. She worked her shifts. Marco drove her. She came home to a house that was quiet in ways Julian's penthouse had never been. Julian's silences had always been loaded, pressurized, pointed at her like something with a trigger, while Dominic's house was quiet the way a library was quiet. Full rather than empty. They fell into habits without discussing them. Coffee in the morning, usually both of them at the kitchen island, him with a document or a phone, and her with whatever she was catching up on, nursing journals, continuing education modules, the notes she kept on patients she was following. They didn't talk every morning. Some mornings they barely said 10 words. But the morning she came down and he wasn't there yet, she noticed his absence, and she noticed that she noticed it, and she noted that fact in the mental file she kept on herself and moved on. He asked her questions when he asked them with genuine interest. Not the kind of interest that was actually about maintaining a performance she had experienced that for 3 years with Julian, who listened to her describe her shifts the way someone keeps the TV on for background noise. Dominic listened like he was adding what she said to an actual picture he was building. He asked follow-up questions. He remembered things she had mentioned days earlier and referred to them. It was disorienting in a way she couldn't fully articulate. Why do you want to know? She asked him one morning when he asked her a specific question about a patient case she had mentioned in passing 2 days earlier. He looked up. Because you mentioned it. Well, people mention things they don't necessarily want followed up on. Then they shouldn't mention them to me, he said. He went back to his document. She looked at him across the kitchen island and thought, you are really not what I expected. She had expected someone who wore power the way Julian wore it, like expensive clothing, like proof, like something that required her to constantly acknowledge it. Dominic wore it differently. He wore it the way a person wears their own skin, like it had simply always been there, and he didn't require her to comment on it. It was considerably more dangerous than she had prepared for. On the 12th day, Priya cornered her in the break room. Okay, Priya said, closing the door with the energy of someone who had been waiting for this conversation for 11 days and was done waiting. Okay, I need you to tell me everything right now because I have been watching you arrive in a black car driven by someone who is clearly not Uber, and you look better than I have ever seen you look, and also slightly like someone who is trying very hard not to look better, and I need to know what is happening. Claire sat down on the break room couch and told her, not everything, not the contract, not Caruso, not the text about Elena, but enough. Julian's penthouse, the escape, Dominic's offer, the arrangement. Priya was quiet for a very long time. Claire, she said, I know. Claire, I know. Like actually, Priya, I know. She looked at her friend. I know exactly what he is. I'm not confused about it. Are you? Priya stopped. She started again. Are you safe? And the honest answer, the one she gave without hesitation, which told her something she filed away for later examination, was yes. Yes, she said. I'm safe. Priya looked at her for a long moment with the expression of someone who was deciding whether to push further or trust the date in front of her. Then she said, you like him. He's a business arrangement. You like him, Priya said again, with the certainty of someone who had known Claire for 4 years and had watched her deflect with clinical language before. You have the face you get when you like someone, and you don't want to admit it because the last time you admitted it, you ended up in Julian Mercer's penthouse with a broken phone. Claire opened her mouth. She closed it. I'm going to get some coffee, she said. That's a yes, Priya called after her. The gala was on a Saturday. It was a charity event, legitimate above board, the kind of event that Dominic attended publicly because being seen at certain functions was part of how his world operated. She knew this. She understood the mechanics of it, and she had gotten genuinely good in the past 2 weeks at understanding the mechanics of his world, the layers of it, the way the visible surface of his life was carefully managed, and what it concealed and what it was designed to project. She wore black this time, her own dress, not Sylvie's, because she had decided that she was not going to spend 3 months being someone else's idea of what she should look like. Dominic saw her come downstairs and said nothing about the dress. He just handed her a glass of sparkling water and said, "Caruso will be there tonight." She took the glass. "Tell me what I need to know." He told her in the car with the efficiency of someone who had rehearsed the briefing and cut everything that wasn't essential. Caruso ran legitimate businesses alongside his other operations. He was charming. He was patient. He would not do anything direct or overt that was not his style. He would watch and he would probe and he would look for the thing he could use. "He'll talk to you," Dominic said. "He'll be very pleasant. Don't tell him anything real." "I work in a hospital," she said. "I talk to frightened people all day. I know how to be pleasant without being informative." He looked at her. "Good. What does he look like?" "You'll know him when you see him," Dominic said. "He's the man who makes everyone around him feel like they're the most important person in the room. That's how he operates." She nodded. She looked out the window. She thought 3 years ago I was a nursing student who was worried about her pharmacology exam. She almost smiled at that. She did know Caruso when she saw him. He was exactly as advertised, maybe 60 silver at the temples, a face arranged by long practice into an expression of genuine warmth. He moved through the event with the ease of someone who had been comfortable in rooms like this his entire life. And when Dominic introduced her, which he did early, intentionally, she understood to control the timing. Caruso took her hand and said, "So this is the woman who's managed to keep our Dominic's attention. That alone makes you exceptional. Or it makes him more patient than his reputation suggests," Claire said. Caruso laughed. He had a good laugh, she noted, the kind that didn't seem manufactured. That was what made him effective. He had done the work to make the performance feel real. "I like you," he said, and she heard the echo of Enzo Vitali saying the same thing 2 weeks ago, and she understood that this was different. When Enzo said it, he meant it. When Caruso said it, he was filing information. He steered the conversation toward her work at the hospital, smoothly, naturally. Like he was genuinely interested, and she steered it somewhere else just as smoothly, just as naturally, because she was a nurse. And she had been doing emotional redirection since her first year of clinical training. They did this 4 times in the first 6 minutes of conversation, and she could feel him registering it, the small recalibration behind his pleasant eyes. And she thought you expected someone younger and easier. She felt a fierce, clean satisfaction about that. Dominic beside her was talking to someone else, but she was aware of exactly where he was, the way she was aware of an IV line she'd placed always in her peripheral attention, always running the background check. Then Caruso said casually, like an afterthought, "You know, I knew someone who was in a similar position once. A woman who cared about Dominic. Elena. Did he ever mention her to you?" And there it was. She looked at him. She let a small, warm, slightly rueful smile move across her face, the smile of a woman who is secure enough to acknowledge her partner's past without being threatened by it. She had practiced that smile in the bathroom mirror for situations exactly like this, because she had known this moment was coming. "He's mentioned her," she said easily. "It must have been a very difficult time for everyone who cared about him." Caruso's eyes moved over her face, quick and precise, looking for a crack, finding none. "You're very understanding," he said. "I'm a nurse," she said. "People tell me things they've never told anyone. You get very good at making room for what people carry." He looked at her for a moment longer. Then he smiled, a real one, this time she thought with something underneath it that was close to appreciation. "Dominic is a lucky man," he said. "Yes," she said. "He is." She excused herself gracefully and found her way to Dominic's side without appearing to have sought him out, which was its own small performance, and she said quietly, "He went for Elena. I know, I was watching. I handled it." "I know that too." A pause, brief and weighted. "You're very good at this." "You keep being surprised by that," she said. "I'm not surprised," he said. "I'm something else." She looked up at him. He was looking at the room, not at her, and his jaw was doing the thing it did when something was costing him more control than he was entirely comfortable with. She looked away before he could catch her looking. She was in trouble. She had known it for days. She was in it now, up past where it was still sensible to pretend otherwise. An hour into the evening, she slipped out to a side corridor to call Priya, not because she needed to, just because she needed 60 seconds of something familiar, and she was standing with her back to the wall, waiting for the call to connect, when she heard footsteps. She turned. Julian. He looked terrible. She registered that first before the fear. Before anything else, he looked like a man who had not been sleeping, whose suit was expensive, and whose eyes were wrong. He had always been immaculate. The fact that he wasn't was its own kind of warning. "I need to talk to you," he said. She hung up on Priya before the call connected. She kept her voice low and level. "Julian, you need to leave. I know you're not really with him." He took a step toward her. "I know what this is. You're scared, so you ran to someone who scared you less. But Claire, this man is not safe. You don't understand what you're in the middle of." "Julian." She stepped back. One step controlled, not retreat positioning. "You are at an event where Dominic DeLuca is a guest. You need to turn around and leave right now before..." "Before what? Before he decides to make another phone call and remind me of my business arrangements." His voice was tight. She could hear everything under it, the rage, and underneath the rage, something more desperate, more fraying. "You think I care about that? You think business arrangements matter to me when I'm watching you? You need to stop. Watching you walk into these events with him like he's..." "Julian." Dominic's voice from behind her. Quiet. Absolute. Julian stopped. Dominic stepped around her partially, not fully enough to be between them, but not enough to push her out of the scene. That specificity registered. He was not removing her from the situation. He was joining it. "You were told..." Dominic said very clearly what the terms were. Julian's jaw worked. His hands were at his sides. She watched him run the calculation. How much of this was in front of witnesses, how far gone he was, what he could and couldn't afford, and she watched him come up against the answer. "She's not yours," Julian said. The words were small and ragged, and they cost him. "No," Dominic said. "She's her own. That's the part you never understood." He took one step forward. His voice dropped so only Julian could hear it, but she was close enough. "Walk out the door, Julian. Don't come back. This is the last conversation we're going to have about this. Do you understand what I'm telling you?" The silence stretched, then Julian looked at her, one long look with everything in it that he had never once said out loud in 3 years, and her chest ached with it, in the way that things you outgrow still sometimes ache, and he left. She stood very still. She breathed. She counted to 4 the way she counted through difficult moments at work. Get the air in, let it ground you, come back to function. Dominic turned around. He was close. Closer than she realized when she wasn't tracking him, which was a whole separate problem for a later time. He looked at her with an expression that was not asking if she was okay because he could already see. "You knew he might be here," she said. "I suspected. And you brought me anyway. I thought about leaving you home." He held her gaze. "I couldn't." She looked at him. Her heart was doing something that she was absolutely not going to address in a corridor at a charity gala. "Why not?" He looked at her for a long moment. Then he did something she hadn't seen him do before. He reached out and very lightly, very briefly tucked a strand of hair back from her face. The touch was so small, it was barely anything. It was the most careful thing she had ever felt. Because he said, "I stopped thinking of you as part of an arrangement about 3 days in." And then he offered her his arm and she took it and they walked back into the room together and neither of them said another word about it. But the air between them was different now in a way that did not reverse when they walked through the door. Something had been named without being named. Something had been decided without being decided. She was beginning to understand that Dominic DeLuca was a man who communicated most honestly in the spaces between what he said and that she had, against all reasonable expectation, become fluent in him. That was either the best thing that had happened to her in years or the most complicated. She was increasingly of the opinion that it was both. She didn't sleep well that night, and she stopped pretending that was about the Julian encounter somewhere around 2 in the morning. She lay in the dark and she was honest with herself, the way she was honest with herself about difficult things directly without flinching, because she had learned that flinching only delayed the reckoning and never canceled it. She was falling for Dominic DeLuca. She was falling in a way that was not situational, not the product of proximity and stress and gratitude, not the Stockholm Syndrome narrative that a less self-aware version of herself might have reached for as an explanation. She was falling because of who he actually was, the specificity of his attention, the way he communicated most truly in the spaces between words, the fact that he had looked at Julian in that corridor and said she's her own like it was the most obvious truth in the world, like it had never occurred to him to think of her any other way. 3 years with Julian, and Julian had never once said anything like that. She got up at 5 and went to the kitchen and made coffee, and she was sitting with it when Dominic came in at 5:30, which meant he also had not slept particularly well, though he looked as always like he had made a deliberate decision to appear otherwise. He saw her at the island. He got his own coffee. He sat down across from her. "The arrangement," she said before he could say anything. "It ends in 6 weeks." He looked at her. "Yes. I want to talk about what happens after." He was quiet for a moment. Outside, the city was barely beginning that particular quality of early morning stillness that felt borrowed, like the world hadn't fully committed to the day yet. "What do you want to happen after?" he asked. "I don't know yet," she said honestly, "but I'd rather talk about it now when it's still 6 weeks away than have it arrive and find out we've been wanting different things." He looked at his coffee cup. He looked back at her. "I told you 3 days in that the arrangement had already changed for me. You told me you stopped thinking of me as part of an arrangement. That's not the same thing as telling me what you want." He was quiet again. This quiet was different, not the withholding kind, not the calculating kind, the kind that came from a man who was not accustomed to being asked directly what he wanted and was taking the question seriously. "I want you to stay," he said, just like that. No preamble, no architectural framework around it. 3 words, flat and honest and completely undefended. "Not for 6 more weeks. Past that. I want you to stay." She looked at him. Her chest did the thing it had been doing for 2 weeks, and she let it this time. Didn't redirect it, didn't chart it. "That's complicated," she said. "Everything real is complicated. Your world is dangerous." "Your world is also dangerous," he said. "You run toward emergencies for a living. You held a patient's hand while he died last week and came home and made dinner. Don't tell me you're afraid of complicated." She opened her mouth. She closed it. He wasn't wrong, which was specifically one of the things that kept being a problem. "I need you to be honest with me," she said. "All the way honest. Not the version of honesty you've been giving me where you tell me the true things in the right order to manage my reaction." He flinched. It was small, barely visible, but she saw it, and he knew she saw it. "That's fair," he said. "Is there anything about this situation, Caruso, the arrangement, any of it, that I don't know yet and should—" He was quiet for 3 seconds. She counted. "Caruso made a move 2 days ago," he said. "He filed paperwork through a legitimate business channel that, if it goes through, creates a financial vulnerability in one of my operations. He's not coming at me directly. He's going to try to squeeze." A pause. "It's manageable. But it means the next few weeks are going to be more active than the last few. More dangerous. Potentially. For me. Not for you. I would not let that happen." "You cannot promise that." "No," he said. "I can't promise it, but I can tell you that everything in my capability will go toward making it true." He met her eyes. "That's actually the most honest thing I can say to another person. Most people dress that up and make it sound like a guarantee. I'm not going to do that with you." She thought about that. She thought about Julian, who had made guarantees constantly. "I will always take care of you. I will always protect you. You will always be safe with me." And how every single guarantee had been a way of controlling the terms of her trust rather than earning it. She thought about Dominic, who said, "I can't promise it," like it was an act of respect rather than a failure. "Okay," she said. "Okay, you'll stay." He looked at her with the most unguarded expression she had seen on him, which was not very unguarded at all, but on his face was considerable. "Okay, I'll think about staying," she said. "That's where I am right now. Don't push." He almost smiled. "I don't push." "You're one of the most relentlessly deliberate people I have ever met," she said. "Everything you do is a push in a direction you have already decided on." This time it was an actual smile. Brief real. That might be accurate. It's entirely accurate, she said, and she got up to refill her coffee, and it was entirely ordinary, two people in a kitchen in the early morning talking about real things, and she thought about how the most dangerous thing that had happened to her in this house was not any of the things she had braced for. It was this. Just this. The call from Priya came at noon on her day off. I need you to tell me you know what you're doing, Priya said, because I've been thinking about it since you told me, and I need to hear it from your mouth. I know what I'm doing, Claire said, with the Mafia boss. He's more complicated than that label. They always are, Priya said in the tone she used when she thought Claire was rationalizing. Claire, babe, I love you. Is this actually? Do you remember, Claire said, what you told me 6 months into my relationship with Julian? When I called you from the hospital bathroom at 11 at night because he'd been texting me every 20 minutes during my shift. A pause. I told you that the way someone makes you feel when they're not in the room is the truest information you have. Yes, Claire said. When Julian wasn't in the room, I felt like I could breathe again, like someone had put down a weight. She paused. When Dominic isn't in the room, I notice he isn't there. That's a different feeling. That's not relief. That's something else. Priya was quiet for a moment. Then you're in it. I'm in it, Claire confirmed. Okay, Priya said. Okay, then I need you to be very, very careful, and I need you to call me every day. And I need you to promise me that if anything feels wrong, you will pick up your shoes and secure a nursing license and walk out. I promise, Claire said. And I need you to admit that you like him. I'm not doing that. Claire. Goodbye, Priya. She hung up. She sat on the edge of her bed and stared at the wall for a moment, and then she said out loud to no one in the empty room, I like him. Just to hear what it sounded like. It sounded inconveniently like the truth. She was back at her desk reading when Marco knocked on her door and said, Mr. DeLuca would like you downstairs. The tone in Marco's voice told her it was not coffee. Dominic was in the study with the stranger from 2 weeks ago, who she now knew was called Reyes, and who served some function in Dominic's operations that she had not pressed for details on, because there were parts of this world she understood she should know, and parts she understood she should not. Reyes looked up when she came in with an expression she couldn't read. Sit down, Dominic said. She sat. Caruso's move wasn't just financial, he said. He was standing, which meant whatever this was, it was something he couldn't sit still through. He has someone on the inside of the Vitali organization, someone who's been feeding him information about our dinner 2 weeks ago. Meaning he knows I handled his Elena question. Meaning he knows more than he should. He looked at her. He also reached out to Julian Mercer this morning. The room felt like it tilted slightly. Julian. Caruso made contact. We're not sure what he offered him yet, but Julian took the meeting. He watched her face. I'm telling you now because you have a right to know and because I am not going to manage this information around you. Not after this morning. She appreciated that. She also felt underneath the appreciation a cold kind of clarity that was very familiar from emergency nursing, the moment when the situation accelerates and everything that was theoretical becomes immediate. What do you think Caruso wants from Julian? Information, leverage. He paused. Julian knows things about your life, your schedule, your habits, where you worked before Mercy General. If Caruso is building a file on me through the people connected to me, Julian is a useful source. Julian hates you. Yes, which makes him easy to use. Dominic's voice was very flat. I want to move you. She looked at him. Move me where? Somewhere Caruso can't map. I have a property outside the city. It's secure. It's not on any record that connects to me directly. I want you there until we've neutralized the Caruso situation. I have a job, she said immediately. I have patience. I know. I'm not leaving my job. I know that too. He crouched down in front of her, a gesture she hadn't seen from him, an actual physical lowering of himself to her level, and he looked at her straight on. I'm not asking you to leave your job. I'm asking you to let me put more protection around you while you go to work and come home. I'm asking you to tell me your schedule every day and let Marco know any changes. And I'm asking you to be careful about Julian, about any contact from him, because right now he is not safe. She looked at him. This close she could see the tension running through him, Not the controlled surface of it, but the thing underneath the thing he was working to contain. She understood it with sudden, complete clarity. He was scared. Not in the way that showed easily, not in the way Julian's fear had always shown as aggression, as control, as a need to make her smaller so he felt less exposed. Dominic's fear showed as precision, as focus, as the absolute refusal to let anything happen to her by failing to be thorough enough. She reached out and put her hand on his, just for a moment, just briefly. His whole body went very still. "Okay," she said. "I'll tell Marco the schedule. I'll be careful about Julian, but I'm keeping my job." "Yes," he said, "obviously. And I'm staying in this house, not some property outside the city. You said you wanted me to stay. That means here." He looked at her hand on his. He turned his hand over slowly, very deliberately, and held hers. "Here," he agreed. She hadn't been prepared for that. The simplicity of it. She made herself breathe normally. 3 days later, Julian called. She almost didn't pick up. She stared at his name on her screen for 4 rings, and then she picked up because she was a person who faced things, and because whatever he had to say, she needed to know it. "I need to see you," he said. His voice was different than she had ever heard it. The control was gone. "Not to get back together. I'm not calling about that. I need to tell you something about DeLuca. Something you don't know." Her pulse went careful and steady. "You can say it over the phone." "I can't. Claire, I'm not. Listen to me. I know you think I'm just trying to pull you back, and maybe 6 weeks ago you would have been right. But I met with someone this week, a man who told me things about Dominic that you need to hear this in person." "Caruso," she said, silence on the line. "Then how do you know that name?" "Because Dominic told me. He told me Caruso reached out to you. He told me before you called." She let that sit. "Whatever Caruso offered you to tell me, Julian, it was designed to wedge between me and Dominic. That's all it was." "Claire, what did he tell you to say?" Another silence. Longer this time. "He said Dominic was using you as bait," Julian said. His voice had gone smaller. "He said DeLuca needed a target, someone Caruso would go after so he could draw Caruso out into the open. He said you were never the point. You were just a decoy." The word landed heavily. She sat with it. She didn't let it move her before she had thought about it the way she didn't make a clinical decision before she had all the data. She thought about Dominic's face this morning. She thought about, "I stopped thinking of you" as part of an arrangement 3 days in. She thought about the way he had held her hand in the study, how still he had gone when she touched him. "I'll look into it," she told Julian. "Claire, I'm serious. I know what I was. I know what I put you through. But I'm not making this up." "I know you're not making it up," she said. "I believe Caruso said it to you. I'm just not sure it's true." She paused. "And Julian, whatever you think you're doing, by calling me whatever part of you thinks this is the way back to something it isn't. I'm telling you that clearly, and I need you to hear it." He was quiet for a long moment. "I just don't want you hurt," he said, and she could hear in the spaces around those words everything complicated about a person who had hurt her badly for years and still believed his own affection was real. It probably was real. That was the painful part. It was just also irrelevant. "I know," she said. "Take care of yourself, Julian." She hung up. She sat for a moment, then she stood up and went to find Dominic. He was in the study. He looked up when she came in. "Caruso told Julian I was a decoy," she said, "that you set up a target so you could draw Caruso into the open." She kept her eyes on his face. "Is that true?" He held her gaze. He did not look away. "It started that way," he said. The air went out of the room. "The original design of the arrangement," he said, his voice very controlled, "was to create a visible association, someone I appeared to care about, that Caruso would be tempted to move against. Because if he moved against that person, he would expose himself, and I would have the opening I needed." He paused. "That was the initial logic. And the contract," she said, "the terms, were all real. The protection from Julian was real. Everything I offered you was real." He stood up. "But yes, Claire, the original reason I walked into that penthouse was not purely because I saw you through the lobby glass." He met her eyes. "I want you to know that I knew who you were before I arrived. I had already been considering the arrangement for several days. I chose you because you fit the profile and because Julian was a problem I could solve simultaneously. She felt something move through her chest, not quite pain, not quite rage, something that combined both and sat in the middle. She kept her breathing even. So I was chosen deliberately. Yes. And everything since then? He crossed the distance between them and stopped 2 feet away. Everything since then has been the most honest I have been with another person in years, he said. What I told you this morning and what I told you at the gala in the car, in this room, none of that was strategy. I don't know how to make you believe that. You could have told me before Julian did. Yes, he didn't flinch from it. I was going to. I've been trying to find the right moment for a week, which is its own kind of dishonesty, and I know it. He looked at her. I'm sorry, that is not a word I use to smooth things over. I mean it. She looked at him for a long moment. Every clinical, practical, rational part of her brain was running its assessment, what she knew, what she could verify, what the pattern of his behavior said about the truth of what he was telling her now. She had watched Julian apologize for 3 years. She knew what a performative apology looked like. She knew what it sounded like. She knew, most importantly, what it felt like, the subtle pressure of it, the way it was always asking her to do something, to concede, to return to position. This didn't feel like that. I need some air, she said. He stepped back, immediately, without asking her to stay, without reaching for her. He just stepped back and gave her the room. She walked to the back of the house, to the small garden that she had never actually spent time in, and she stood there in the night air, and she felt everything she was feeling without managing it for once. The anger, real, legitimate, hers. The hurt, also real, also legitimate. And underneath both of those, still there, undeniable and inconvenient and specific, the thing she had admitted out loud to an empty room 3 days ago. She liked him. She trusted him. Not blindly, she had never trusted anyone blindly. It wasn't in her nature, but she trusted the specific person she had watched him be for 4 weeks, in kitchens, in cars, in gala corridors. She trusted the man who said, she's her own, like it was obvious. The man who crouched down to be at her level. The man who held her hand and went still. That man had also chosen her as a strategic asset. Both things were true. That was the part she had to sit with. She stood in the garden for 11 minutes. She counted. Then she went back inside. He was exactly where she had left him. He hadn't moved. He was waiting the way she had seen him wait for other things, fully, without hedging. Don't ever do that again, she said. Don't manage information around me. Don't time the delivery. Don't decide when I'm ready to know something. If it concerns me, I hear it when you know it. That is the only version of this that works. Yes, he said, nothing else. And I want you to understand that I am not staying because I have nowhere else to go. I am not staying because I'm scared of Julian or because the arrangement is convenient. I need you to know that. He looked at her. Then why are you staying? She held his gaze. Because I think you are the most difficult, most controlled, most occasionally infuriating man I have ever met, she said. And I would rather be in a complicated, real thing with you than in an easy, comfortable, nothing with someone simpler. The silence that followed was the most charged one she had experienced in 4 weeks of charged silences. Dominic took 1 step toward her. She did not step back. He raised his hand and touched her face, the same careful, barely there touch from the gala corridor. Except this time he didn't pull back after. This time his thumb traced her cheekbone, and he looked at her with the expression that had no control in it, none at all, just the truth of a man who had been armored for so long he had almost forgotten that another person could get through. Claire, he said, her name in his voice, no architecture around it, just her name. I know, she said. And she leaned into his hand and closed her eyes and let herself be held for the first time and longer than she could measure. She stayed. That was the decision, made without fanfare, without a formal announcement, simply lived into over the days that followed. She stayed in his house, in his life, in the complicated, real thing she had chosen, with both eyes open. She went to her shifts at Mercy General, and Marco drove her, and she came home to coffee and kitchen mornings and a man who had started leaving her small notes on the counter. When he left before she woke, not love notes, nothing so performed as that, just information. Meeting runs late. There's soup in the pot. Reyes will be here at 9. Stay upstairs if you'd rather not see him. Practical, specific, utterly him. She kept every one of them in the drawer of her nightstand without examining why. The Caruso situation moved fast in the days after their conversation in the study. She could feel it in the house the way she could feel a patient trending toward crisis, a subtle change in atmosphere, a sharpening of attention in everyone around her. Reyes came and went more frequently. Dominic's phone calls got shorter and more clipped. He slept less, though he tried to hide that. And she knew he was trying to hide it, and she let him, because she understood that some people needed the dignity of their own management, even when the people who loved them could see through it. She had stopped not using that word in her own head. She was a practical woman. She called things what they were. The morning Reyes came in and said, "Caruso moved." Dominic was already at the kitchen table and Claire was 2 minutes from leaving for a shift. She stopped. She looked at Dominic. "Go to work," he said. "Tell me what happened." "Go to work, Claire. I will tell you everything tonight." She looked at him for a moment, that specific, direct look she had developed for him, the one that said, "I trust you, but I am watching, and I need you to know both things simultaneously." And then she picked up her bag and she went to work. Because she had a shift. Because people needed her. And because she had chosen to trust him, and trust, she had learned, was not a feeling you waited to have. It was a decision you made and then honored. She checked her phone twice between patients. She had 14 hours of shift ahead of her, and she got through them the same way she got through everything, by being present completely in each individual moment and not letting what she couldn't control eat the parts of her she needed for the parts she could. Priya found her at the medication cart at hour 6 and said quietly, "You okay?" "Something's happening," Claire said. "With Caruso. I don't know the details yet." Priya put a hand on her arm. Brief grounding. "You know what you told me about the way someone makes you feel when they're not in the room?" "Yes." "How do you feel right now?" Claire thought about it honestly. "Like I need to get through this shift and get home," she said. "Like home is somewhere specific?" She paused. "Like I'm scared for him, not of him." Priya nodded. "That's the difference," she said. "That's the whole difference." She squeezed her arm and walked away, and Claire went back to the medication cart and went back to work. Dominic called at hour 11. Not a text, a call, which he rarely did during her shifts, because he knew what it meant to interrupt a nurse mid-floor. She stepped into the stairwell and picked up. "Are you between patients?" he asked first. "Yes, talk to me." "Caruso made his move this afternoon. He executed the financial paperwork he filed last week. It went through a channel I wasn't blocking because I didn't know he had access to it. It created a real vulnerability, not just a theoretical one." A pause. "He also sent someone to the house." Her chest went cold. "Dominic." "I wasn't there. Marco handled it. No one was hurt." His voice was steady, but she had been listening to him for 5 weeks, and she could hear the thing underneath the steadiness now. It was a message. "He knows the financial move alone isn't enough to take me down, so he wanted me to know he could reach into my home." "He wanted to scare you." "Yes." "Did it work?" she asked. A brief silence. "It made me angry," he said, "which is more dangerous for him than scared would have been." Another pause, shorter. "I'm telling you because you need to know, and because I said I would. You are not in danger. I have people at the hospital. You won't see them, but they're there. And when you come home tonight, we need to talk." "I'll be off at midnight," she said. "I'll be up," he said. And then in a different register, quieter, stripped of the operational efficiency, "Claire, I'm glad you're okay." "I'm glad you're okay," she said. She hung up and stood in the stairwell for 30 seconds. Then she went back to work. He was in the kitchen when she got home, the way she had known he would be. The house felt different. She couldn't point to any specific physical thing, just a heightened alertness, a sense that its defenses were fully deployed. She sat across from him and he told her everything. The financial exposure, what it meant, how he was countering it. The man Caruso had sent a low-level operative a message rather than a genuine threat. And then the thing she had not expected, Caruso had also contacted Enzo Vitali. He had gone to the man at the head of the table at that first dinner and presented a version of events in which Dominic was overextended, destabilized, no longer the reliable partner Vitali had known. "He's trying to peel your alliances," she said. "Yes, if Vitali pulls back, 3 other relationships follow him. It's elegant, actually." He said it without admiration, just recognition. "Caruso doesn't use direct force when indirect force is available. He's been doing this for 30 years. "What does Vitali think?" Dominic was quiet for a moment. "That's the part I wasn't expecting," he said. Vitali called me himself this afternoon. He told me what Caruso had said. He looked at her. And then he said that the woman I brought to dinners was the clearest signal he had seen in years that I knew what I was doing. He held her gaze. He said, and I'm quoting, that a man who chooses well at home chooses well everywhere else, and he wasn't ready to stop betting on me. She stared at him. Vitali backed you because of me. Because of who you are, Dominic said. What you said at that dinner, how you handled yourself. He's 70 years old and he has been reading people since before either of us was born, and what he saw in you was genuine. He paused. It was genuine. None of that was performance. He knew it and I knew it. She sat back. She felt something settle in her chest, not quite pride, something quieter than that. The particular satisfaction of having brought her actual self to something and having it be enough, more than enough. What happens now? She asked. Now I use the opening Vitali just gave me, he said. Caruso needed Vitali to move before he could take the next step. Without that, his financial move is painful but survivable. Without Vitali and the chain of relationships Vitali anchors, Caruso is exposed. He looked at her. I have a meeting tomorrow morning. By the end of the week, Caruso's operation will have a problem of its own to manage. She understood he was not going to tell her the specifics of that, and she understood why, and she had made her peace with the architecture of that boundary. There were things she did not need to know and things she needed to know, and she had gotten good in 5 weeks at identifying the difference. And Julian, she asked. Dominic's expression shifted slightly. Julian Mercer went to Caruso voluntarily. Whatever Julian told himself about why that he was protecting you, that he was trying to expose DeLuca, whatever story he built around it, the practical reality is that he handed Caruso information about you. He was very careful with his voice. I'm not going to tell you how to feel about that. She thought about Julian's call, about I just don't want you hurt, delivered with complete sincerity by a man who had been hurting her for 3 years without fully knowing it. I feel sad about it, she said finally. Not for me, for him. He's going to spend a long time being the kind of person who does something like that and doesn't understand why it was wrong. She paused. That's not my problem to solve anymore. No, Dominic said, it isn't. Is he in danger from Caruso? Caruso has no more use for him. He's been cut loose. He looked at her carefully. He's not in danger. He's just irrelevant now. She nodded. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I want to be at that meeting tomorrow. Dominic stilled. That's not in the room, she said. I know. I'm not asking to be in the room, but I want to be at the house. I don't want to be somewhere else while something important is happening. I've been going to work and coming home and being careful, and I have not pushed, and I need you to give me this one. He looked at her for a long moment. You can be here, he said. You stay in the upper floor until it's finished. Fine. And you don't come down if you hear anything that concerns you unless I call for you. Dominic. Claire, those are the terms. Fine, she said again, and she meant it, and she could see that he understood she meant it. The meeting was at 9 the next morning. She stayed upstairs. She worked on her continuing education module, and she drank her coffee, and she listened to the low murmur of voices below her without trying to distinguish words the way you listen to rain, aware of it, not trying to parse it. At 11:15, she heard the voices stop. At 11:22, she heard footsteps on the stairs. Dominic came in without knocking. She had told him weeks ago to stop knocking. It made the house feel like a hotel, and he sat down on the edge of the chair across from her, and he looked at her with an expression she hadn't seen before. Something open. Something that was the inverse of the controlled, armored surface she had met in Julian's penthouse 7 weeks ago. It's done, he said. She put down her module. Done how? Caruso is taking a meeting of his own this afternoon with 2 of his key financial partners. They're going to present him with an audit, a real one, not manufactured, that reveals exposure in his own operation that he thought was sealed. Vitali's people handled it. He paused. Caruso will spend the next 6 months managing his own problem. He won't have the bandwidth or the motivation to come at me. He looked at her. It's over. She let out a breath, just like that. It's never just like that, he said. It took 30 years of relationships and one very well-timed dinner and a woman who handled Caruso's Elena question so cleanly that Vitali decided I was worth betting on. He held her gaze. So not just like that, us. She looked at him. The arrangement, she said. Technically, it has 3 more weeks. Technically, he said, I think we both know it stopped being an arrangement a while ago. I think we both know that, yes. So I want to renegotiate, she said. He looked at her with something that was fully a smile now, not the controlled flicker she had cataloged in those first weeks, but an actual, real, undefended smile that did something significant to her heart. What are your terms? I keep my job, non-negotiable always. Obviously, I keep my own space in this house. I am not folding my life into yours, I'm building something alongside it. That means I have my things, my room, my autonomy, and you respect all of it. Agreed, and you tell me the truth, all the way, all the time when it concerns me the moment you know it. Never again timed for my reaction. Agreed, oh no, he said, and she heard the weight in it, the accountability. And you stop looking surprised when I handle things well, she said, because I have been handling things well my entire life, and I was doing it before I met you, and I'll be doing it long after, and I need to be with someone who expects that from me rather than being periodically astonished by it. He was quiet for a moment. That one, he said, I'll have to work on. Not because I don't believe it, because you exceed what I expect in ways I haven't fully adjusted for yet. That's the most honest thing you could have said, she told him. I'm trying, he said, to be honest, all the way. She stood up. She crossed the room to where he was sitting, and she stood in front of him, and he looked up at her, and she took his face into both hands, the way she had wanted to do for longer than she was willing to admit to anyone, including Priya, and she kissed him. Not desperately, not like something collapsing, like something beginning, like the first real breath after a long empty time of breathing shallowly. He kissed her back the way she had somehow known he would completely, without performing at the same total focus he brought to everything. His hands found her waist, and he stood up, and for a moment they just held on, and the house around them was very quiet and very real. She pulled back first. She looked at him. 3 years with Julian, she said, and I never once felt like the most important person in a room. Not in a way that was about me, rather than about him needing to be someone who had me. He was listening in the way he always listened, all the way, no part of his attention anywhere else. I need that to be different, she said. I know your world is complicated, and I know there are rooms I'll never be in and decisions I'll never be part of. I'm not asking to be. I'm asking that when I'm with you, I'm actually with you. Not a strategic presence. Not a symbol. Me. You, he said, just that. Like there was no ambiguity about it whatsoever. She nodded. She stepped back. She was a practical woman, and she was not going to cry in a bedroom over a man, not even this one. She cleared her throat. I have a shift in 4 hours. I know your schedule, he said. Of course you do, she said. She was almost to the door when he said her name. She turned. He was standing in the middle of the room with his hands at his sides and the most unguarded expression she had ever seen on him. And he said, I chose you for the wrong reasons at the start. I know that. I'm not going to spend the rest of my life apologizing for it because you don't want that, and I think it would be dishonest. It's done, and what came from it is real, and I would rather honor what's real than perform contrition about the beginning. He held her gaze. But I want you to know that I see it. I see the full thing. I know you do, she said. That's why I'm staying. She went to her shift. She coded a patient at hour 3, brought him back clean and fast, the team moving around her with the precision she had spent years building. And when it was over, and she was standing in the hallway with her hands still carrying the adrenaline of it, she thought, I am very good at what I do. I have always been very good at what I do. And I am going home tonight to someone who knows it, expects it, and has never once suggested I should be less. The weeks after that had a different quality than the weeks before. Not easier necessarily. Dominic's world did not become simpler, and hers did not either. And there were nights when he came home from something she didn't ask about, and she could see the weight of it on him, and she was learning the specific way to be present with that, without pushing and without retreating. There were mornings when she was running on 4 hours of sleep after a brutal overnight, and she was short in ways she had to apologize for. Real things, imperfect things. Julian sent one more message 6 weeks after the night at the gala. 3 lines I heard Caruso back down. I'm glad you're okay. I'm sorry for all of it. She read it twice. She typed back, take care of yourself. She meant it without affection and without residue. The way you mean it when you say it to a patient you're discharging, genuine care, clean boundary, no looking back. She showed it to Dominic. He read it, handed the phone back and said, "You good time?" "Yes," she said. "You sure?" "Dominic, I'm sure." He nodded. He went back to his document. She went back to her journal article. And it was so ordinary, so entirely and completely ordinary, that she had to stop and sit for a moment with the weight of it. This ordinary, this calm, this utterly undramatic morning, because she had spent 3 years learning to fear the quiet, to wait for the thing that would arrive and shatter it, and the quiet in this house was different. This quiet had no trap in it. It was just quiet. Priya came for dinner on a Saturday 2 months in. Dominic cooked, which had turned out to be one of the things about him that she had not predicted. This man who ran criminal operations and managed enemies with 30 years of cunning also cooked methodically and well, in the same way he did everything. Priya sat across from him and asked him 3 pointed questions over the first course that were so obviously a vetting that Claire covered a smile with a wine glass. He answered all 3 of them directly. No deflection, no charm offensives, just honest answers. After, when Dominic stepped out to take a call, Priya leaned across the table and said, "Okay." "Okay what?" Claire said. "Okay, I see it." Priya watched her. The way he listened to you talk about your patient tonight, he wasn't waiting for his turn to talk. He was actually listening. "Yes," Claire said. "Julian used to do that thing," Priya said, "where he'd look at you but his eyes were already moving to whatever he wanted to say next." "Yes," Claire said again. "Dominic's eyes don't move," Priya said. "They just stay on you." Claire looked at the doorway where he had disappeared. "Yes," she said for the 3rd time. "They do." Priya reached across and squeezed her hand. "Good," she said. "You deserve eyes that stay." The night Dominic told her he loved her, they were in the kitchen. It was not a dramatic moment, no candles, no setting, no performance. She had just gotten off a difficult shift, one of the ones that followed her home, and she was sitting at the island with her hands wrapped around a mug, and he was across from her, and she had told him about the patient. She'd lost a 12-year-old boy, and her voice had not broken, but her hands had just slightly, just enough, and he had reached across and covered them with his, and he had said it. "I love you." As simply as he said everything true. She looked at him, her hands steadied under his. She thought about the elevator, 7 weeks into what was supposed to be a 3-month arrangement that had ended before it finished. She thought about "I have you" said to a woman holding a box of her own things and a shattered phone in a lobby at midnight. She thought about how it had felt like a beginning, even then, even when she didn't know his face. "I love you," she said back. No architecture around it, just the words. He held her hands. The kitchen was quiet. Outside, the city moved through its night the way it always did, indifferent, relentless, completely unconcerned, with the 2 people inside one house in one ordinary kitchen, making something true out of a beginning that had been complicated and imperfect and real. She was not the woman Julian had tried to make smaller so he could feel large. She was not a pawn in an arrangement, not a strategic asset, not a symbol of anyone's stability. She was Claire Harper, nurse negotiator, the woman who had walked out of a penthouse with a box and a shattered phone and made something whole from what came after. She was the woman who stood her ground in the middle of fear and chose the complicated real thing over the comfortable nothing. She was the woman who had looked at a dangerous man and understood without flinching exactly who he was and stayed anyway because she knew who she was too. She was his and he was hers, and neither of them had arrived here easily or cleanly, and none of that mattered anymore because what they had built in the difficult space between who they had been and who they were becoming was solid ground, hers to stand on, theirs to keep, and strong enough to hold whatever came next.